My act of kindness was the final trigger. The old woman wasn't the victim. She was the mastermind who had me arrested to test her enemies. The rain was coming down in sheets, the kind that makes you question every life decision that led you to walk home on foot. I saw her huddled under the awning of the closed bakery, Mrs. Petrova. 80 years old if she was a day, shivering so hard her plastic bag was rattling. Instinct took over. I ducked into the all-night market, grabbed the fresh loaf she always smelled like she craved, and 2 cartons of good whole milk. "Mrs. Petrova, please," I said, forcing the warm bread into her hands. "You can't stay out here." Her eyes, magnified by thick lenses, focused on the offerings. Not with gratitude, not immediately, with a deep, unsettling calculation. She clutched the bread to her chest like it was a shield. "You have a good heart, child," she whispered, her voice sandpaper on dry wood. "That's a dangerous thing to carry these days." I just smiled, trying to keep the mood light. "It's better than carrying the alternative, I suppose." She didn't return the smile. Instead, she looked past me, down the empty, slick street. "There was a man," she began, taking a slow, deliberate bite of the dry crust, chewing meticulously. 10 years ago, he saw trouble brewing in the district. He tried to stop it. Small things, at first. Telling people to be careful, reporting suspicious movements to the local precinct. He thought if he just pointed out the rot, the grown-ups would fix it. I leaned against the damp brick wall, suddenly forgetting the cold. Her voice had dropped to a conspiratorial hush that demanded attention. This wasn't neighborhood gossip. This felt like testimony. "This man," she continued, wiping crumbs from her chin with the back of a knotted hand. "He saw the organized scheme moving in, not the loud ones, the quiet ones, the ones who control the paperwork, the zoning permits, the delivery routes. They were building something huge under the guise of redevelopment. He had proof, documents. He went to the authorities, just like you did with your good intentions, thinking the system works." My stomach tightened. I knew that look in her eyes. It was the look of someone who had seen the gears grind someone else to dust. "And what happened to him?" I managed to ask. She took a long, slow sip of the milk, savouring it as if it were the last liquid on earth. "They didn't touch him directly, not at first. That's amateur hour. They isolated him. They made him look unstable. Then, they brought in the big weight. They fabricated a situation, a sudden, unexpected police raid on his cousin's empty warehouse. And they planted evidence there. Something that looked like they were planning acts of significant sabotage against city infrastructure. They made it look like premeditated planning for a massive disruption." My breath hitched. I was thinking about my own small struggles lately, the shady contractor I'd been fighting over my apartment lease, the anonymous threats I'd been receiving after I questioned a zoning decision near the docks. The cousin took the fall, but the threat lingered over everyone associated with him, Mrs. Petrova murmured, her gaze locking onto mine with terrifying intensity. "The man who warned everyone? They couldn't pin the Chashka obvineni on him directly, but they found a way. They twisted his history, his connections. They accused him of being the financier, the architect behind the whole network of radicals planning the destruction. They used every piece of information he had ever shared about the real criminals to build a case proving he was the mastermind preparing the attacks." That's impossible," I stammered. "A false accusation like that, it can't stick." "Jeez." Petrova let out a dry, humourless chuckle. "It sticks if the prosecutor has the right incentives, dear. It sticks if the judge owes favours. It sticks if the witnesses who saw the original corruption suddenly change their story under pressure from the Služba vnitřní bezpečnosti. They didn't just try to frame him for a little fraud. They tried to pin an accusation equivalent to attempting to shatter the city's core functionality. They threatened him with decades, a crushing, inescapable sentence. She finished the milk carton, crushed it violently in her frail hand, and then leaned in so close I could smell the faint scent of mothballs and stale tobacco on her breath. "He escaped. He's still running. But they didn't just target him. They targeted everyone who showed him even minor kindness in the year before the raid, His landlord, his barber, the woman who delivered his dry cleaning. Her eyes widened, suddenly frantic. They use the accusation as the weapon. They don't need to prove it. They just need everyone to believe they might have done it. The suspicion poisons everything. She looked down at the half-eaten loaf of bread in my hands, then back to my face, and the air went frigid. You brought me bread and milk, child. You showed concern. And I'm old, and I remember things. She paused, drawing a sharp, rattling breath. The man they tried to bury? The one accused of funding the whole operation? His only weakness was his need to secretly deliver supplies to the elderly shut-ins in this very neighbourhood. The same supplies he bought just 2 blocks from here. Her eyes drilled into mine, wide with a sudden, paralysing horror. They've been watching this corner for months, not for radicals, for the helpers, for anyone who might be carrying on his quiet network. She pointed a trembling finger, not at the street, but directly at the package I dropped carelessly beside my own grocery bag. A small, wrapped box containing the specialised medication I picked up earlier that day for my downstairs neighbour who was too ill to leave his apartment. That prescription you're holding, she hissed, leaning back as if burned. The one for Mr. Davies? It's the exact same prescription he was using as cover to move his communication devices before they caught him. They're already here. And, as if on cue, the sound of heavy, unmarked vehicles skidding to a halt at both ends of the narrow alleyway ripped through the downpour, the harsh glare of spotlights blinding me, freezing me mid-step as uniformed figures flooded the entrance. They weren't looking at Mrs. Petrova. Every single pair of eyes was locked directly onto me. The sudden floodlights were physical blows. They stripped the rain-soaked night down to a stark, terrifying stage. I didn't even have time to process Mrs. Petrova's warning before the world contracted to the metallic click of heavy boots hitting the pavement behind me. Don't move! The voice was amplified, devoid of inflection, echoing off the wet brickwork. It wasn't the local police. These were the sharp, cold tones of federal enforcement. The Internal Audit Division, the people who handled accusations too dangerous for public consumption. My heart hammered against my ribs. A frantic bird trying to escape a cage, the supplies, the prescription, the pattern. It wasn't just a coincidence, it was a trap baited with altruism. They hadn't been watching her. They'd been watching anyone who showed kindness in this specific radius, waiting for someone else to fit the profile of the unwitting courier. And I had just walked right into the centre of it. I instinctively took a step back toward the door of the darkened bakery, my mind screaming for an explanation, a denial, anything that wasn't silence. Drop the bag, slowly, the voice commanded, closer now. The bag. It held the medication for Mr. Davies, wrapped in plain brown paper, exactly how the underground network supposedly used to disguise their communications gear. I looked down at the package, then at Mrs. Petrova. She was gone, vanished. In the split second the lights blinded us, she had dissolved back into the shadows, leaving me alone, framed in the glare. I don't know what you think I'm doing, I yelled, my voice cracking. I was helping an old woman. I bought groceries. I held up my empty hands, careful not to jostle the package still clutched in my left hand. A figure detached from the glare, tall, lean, wearing tactical gear that looked far too heavy for a simple welfare check. He levelled a non-lethal restraint device directly at my chest. The item in your possession, which matches the description recovered from the primary suspect's last known communication hub, needs to be surrendered now, the man stated, his voice unnervingly calm. We are aware of the narrative you've been fed. We are offering you the chance to cooperate before we have to escalate this to a full apprehension regarding charges related to aiding and abetting domestic disruption. Aiding and abetting. That was the softer language for the tashka obvinenia they'd used against the man Mrs. Petrova mentioned. They weren't accusing me of planning the sabotage. They were accusing me of being the clean runner, the unaware mule for the architects of chaos. My options evaporated. If I surrendered the package, it became evidence tying me to a fabricated conspiracy. If I ran, I confirmed their suspicion immediately. My gaze darted to the street. The vehicles were blocking the main road, but the alley behind the bakery was narrow, choked with overflowing dumpsters and fire escapes. It was a long shot, but running felt like the only path that didn't immediately end with me handcuffed and being read charges that would guarantee decades of incarceration. I threw the bag of groceries, the bread and milk, hard toward the lead officer. It was a diversion, a pathetic flash of white and brown meant to draw attention for a single second. "Get down!" That single second was all I needed. I bolted. I didn't head for the fire escape. That was too predictable. I dove sideways toward the row of industrial-sized dumpsters, sliding across the slick, garbage-strewn ground. The sound of the pursuit intensified immediately. Shouts, the heavy thud of running, and the sickening thwack as the first stun dart missed my shoulder by millimeters, embedding itself in the brickwork above me. I scrambled behind the largest dumpster, the stench momentarily overwhelming the fear. I could hear them splitting up. One group maintaining the perimeter, two clearly angling to cut me off down the alley. I was trapped. No exit, no cover that could withstand a determined sweep. Then I saw it. Tucked beneath the lip of the dumpster, hidden in the shadows Mrs. Petrova had used moments before, was a small rusted access panel to the sub-level utility tunnels, the very infrastructure Mrs. Petrova warned the radicals were planning to disrupt. My fingers scrabbled at the corroded metal. It popped open with a screech that seemed deafening in the sudden silence of the standoff. Below was absolute darkness and the distant sound of dripping water. I didn't hesitate. I slid feet first into the opening just as the first officer rounded the corner, his flashlight beam sweeping wildly. _, 0, I dropped perhaps 8 feet, landing heavily on a narrow, muddy ledge inside a concrete channel. The air was stale, metallic. I could hear the pounding above me intensify as they realized I'd gone subterranean. I started crawling forward into the darkness, driven only by the need to put distance between myself and the spotlights. I pulled the package, Davies's prescription, from my pocket, clutching it like a lifeline. After what felt like an eternity of desperate crawling, the concrete tunnel opened into a vast, echoing chamber, a forgotten storage basement beneath the city's old municipal building, judging by the crumbling architecture. My flashlight beam cut through the gloom, revealing stacks of forgotten equipment, dusty tarps, and then something that made my blood turn to ice water. Against the far wall, illuminated by a single, weak emergency bulb flickering overhead, was a makeshift command center. 3 figures were hunched over topographical maps of the city grid, illuminated screens displaying sensitive security schematics. They weren't just any criminals. They were organized, professional, and clearly connected to the real threats Mrs. Petrova spoke of. And sitting at the head of the table, looking up at my entry into the chamber, completely unsurprised, was Mrs. Petrova. She wasn't frail. She was wearing a tailored, dark tactical vest over her simple dress, and beside her sat the tall, lean man who had been leading the tactical team outside. He wasn't arresting me. He was guarding her. Mrs. Petrova smiled, a genuine, sharp, predatory smile this time, utterly devoid of the sweet old lady facade. "Welcome, child," she said, gesturing to the empty chair beside her. "I knew you were the only one pure enough to complete the delivery. We needed someone without any real criminal ties to test the alert response. Your neighbour's medication was just the cover signal. Now, show us what the Slusby Bezopasnosti planted on you when they followed you here." The air in the cavernous basement solidified around me. The revelation wasn't just that Mrs. Petrova was a high-level operator. It was that the entire sequence, the rain, the bread, the fabricated warning, the sudden raid, was a complex, orchestrated test. I hadn't stumbled into a trap set by the authorities. I had been maneuvered into a meeting by the very people I was meant to be afraid of. I was not the innocent bystander. I was the designated delivery drone, vetted by a terrifying performance piece. You set this up," I choked out, the reality crushing the last vestiges of my previous life's logic. _, Mrs. Petrova tilted her head, the soft wrinkles around her eyes deepening. But this time, it was mockery, not kindness. The authorities are predictable. Their paranoia is a useful tool. When they saw you running from their perimeter, they assumed you were fleeing us. But we knew they were tracking the location of the test item, your neighbour's prescription, which, of course, is now considered contraband in their eyes, linking you to the radicals they were so desperate to find evidence against. The officer beside her, the one who had been barking orders outside, finally spoke, his voice calm now that we were deep underground, away from official channels. We needed to confirm that the initial planting of the communication signal on Davies's order form wasn't detected before retrieval. You confirmed that the opposing service is still tracking low-level supply chains. Your performance was excellent, by the way. Very convincing panic. The betrayal was physical, a cold wave washing over my certainty. I looked down at the small, wrapped box in my hand. Davies's medication. The signal. So what happens now? I asked, my voice strangely steady. If I was already in this deep, playing their game, maybe there was one last move left. Quote, 3. Mrs. Petrova laughed, a genuine rattling sound this time. Reward? Child, you have seen too much to be rewarded with cash. You are now an asset. You know the pattern, you survived the test, and you delivered the sensitive package to the right hands. You either join us, or you disappear into the network of false charges we've already prepared for you. She pushed a thick file folder across the table. It was stamped with government seals, but the handwriting on the cover was an unfamiliar, archaic script. Inside are the real documents the man who ran 10 years ago tried to expose. Documents proving that the entire infrastructure you think protects you, the Služba vnitřní bezpečnosti, is deeply compromised, built on systemic fraud and deliberate framing of political dissenters. I opened the file, skimming the first page, irrefutable proof of systemic abuse of power, involving high-ranking officials tied to the very people who had been hunting the terrorist sympathizers. This is genuine, I whispered. It is a weapon, she corrected, and we need someone who looks like a victim of the system to carry it to the press, someone who just barely escaped a frame-up. You will be the reluctant hero who risked everything to expose the real criminals who operate with impunity inside the state. The choice was no choice at all. I could fade away into a lifetime of being chased as a shadow criminal, or I could leverage this terrifying situation into a chance for actual justice. The irony was suffocating. To expose corruption, I had to first become a pawn for a different, more organised network. I looked from the damning evidence to Mrs. Petrova, the puppet master who had used my simple act of kindness as the final trigger. I'll do it, I said, pushing the file back to her. But I take the documents. I walk out the front door and I control the narrative. I expose the security service, and I expose anyone who helped frame innocent people for their schemes, including the man who ran 10 years ago, if he's still using this neighbourhood as a cover. Ms. Petrova's eyes narrowed, a flicker of respect replacing the amusement. She slid the file back to me. Fair enough, asset, she conceded. We need the state apparatus purged more than we need a single courier. But understand this. If you deviate, if you try to use this leverage on us, we know where your apartment is. And we know Mr. Davies is still relying on you for his medicine. The threat hung heavy, a permanent tether. I took the file, its weight a sudden, enormous responsibility. I had walked into the storm trying to help an old woman, and now I was leaving armed with the truth, poised to ignite the biggest scandal of the decade, all while knowing the very people who helped me were the next set of shadows I'd have to watch for. As I turned to climb back toward the alley, where the officers were still searching for a dangerous fugitive, I looked back at the command post. Mrs. Petrova raised her glass of water in a silent toast. Go make them pay, child, and remember, the most dangerous people are the ones who look the most harmless when they offer you bread.